There are seasons in life that feel heavy in a way that is difficult to explain. Nothing dramatic may have happened on the outside. The world continues moving. People around you are busy with their own lives. Yet inside your heart, something feels different. Something feels harder than before. Maybe you wake up in the morning already feeling tired, even though the day has barely begun. Maybe the things that once brought you joy now feel distant, like echoes from another time. Maybe you pray and wait for answers, but the silence stretches longer than you expected. And in those quiet moments, a question begins to form in your mind. Why is this happening? Why does life sometimes become so difficult, even when you are trying to do the right thing? Why do certain seasons feel like walking through a long, dark valley with no clear end in sight? Perhaps you have experienced a season like this. A season where doors seem to close instead of open. A season where relationships change or drift apart. A season where the future that once looked bright suddenly feels uncertain. Maybe you have prayed many times. You asked God for direction. You asked Him to remove the obstacles in your path. You asked Him to make things clear again. But the answers you hoped for did not come the way you expected. Sometimes it even feels as though heaven is quiet. In those moments, it is easy to wonder if something has gone wrong. It is easy to feel forgotten, overlooked, or left behind while everyone else seems to be moving forward. But what if the season you are walking through right now is not a mistake? What if the difficulty you are facing is not evidence that God has abandoned you, but rather a sign that He is doing something deeper in your life? The truth is that throughout history, some of the most powerful transformations in a person's life have happened during their most difficult seasons. The times when everything felt uncertain. The times when the path ahead was unclear. The times when faith was not easy, but necessary. If you look at the stories throughout the Bible, you will notice something interesting. The people who eventually experienced great purpose often walked through long periods of struggle before they saw the fulfillment of God's plan. There were seasons of waiting, seasons of confusion, seasons where nothing seemed to make sense. Yet those seasons were not empty. Even when it looked like nothing was happening on the surface, something was quietly changing beneath it. Because difficult seasons often have a purpose that we cannot immediately see. Just like winter in nature. During winter, the ground looks lifeless. Trees lose their leaves. The air grows cold. Everything appears still and quiet. If someone only saw the surface, they might think the life of the forest had ended. But beneath the ground, something else is happening. Roots are strengthening. Seeds are preparing. Life is quietly waiting for the right moment to grow again. In many ways, the difficult seasons of life are similar. They may feel cold. They may feel slow. They may feel confusing. But that does not mean nothing is happening. Sometimes God allows these seasons because they prepare us for something greater than we could have imagined before. There are lessons that comfort cannot teach. There are strengths that only struggle can reveal. There are depths of faith that only grow when we are forced to trust God, even when we cannot see the full picture. And perhaps the most surprising truth of all is this. Some of the seasons that feel the most painful in the moment eventually become the seasons we look back on with the deepest understanding. Not because the pain was easy, not because the struggle disappeared, but because we eventually see how God was guiding us, shaping us, and protecting us in ways we did not recognize at the time. If you are walking through a difficult season right now, it may feel like you are standing in the middle of a long night. But the night does not last forever. Morning always comes. And often, the people who experience the most beautiful sunrise are the ones who had to walk through the darkest hours to reach it. So the question is not only why difficult seasons exist. The deeper question is this. What could God be doing in your life during this season that you cannot yet see? Because sometimes the seasons that feel like the end of something are actually the beginning of something far greater than we imagined. And the path through difficulty may not be a detour at all. It may be the very road that leads us exactly where God intended us to go. There is a moment in almost every person's life when things suddenly become harder than expected. Not because you made a terrible mistake. Not because you stopped believing. Not because you stopped trying. But simply because life entered a season that you did not choose. These seasons often arrive quietly. There is rarely a clear warning. One day life feels normal, predictable, and manageable. Then slowly, almost without noticing it, the atmosphere begins to change. Things that once felt simple start to feel heavy. A plan that once seemed certain suddenly falls apart. A relationship that once felt stable becomes distant. Opportunities that once appeared open begin to close. And before long, you realize something has shifted. You have entered a difficult season. For many people, this is when confusion begins to grow. Because deep down we often believe that if we are doing the right things, if we are trying to live with faith, kindness, and integrity, life should move smoothly. But reality often tells a different story. Sometimes the hardest seasons come not when we are far from God, but when we are actually trying to follow Him more closely. This is the part that many people struggle to understand. Why would a loving God allow seasons of hardship? Why would He allow uncertainty, disappointment, or waiting? These questions are not new. In fact, they have been asked for thousands of years by people who loved God deeply. Throughout history, faithful people have found themselves in moments where life felt unfair, confusing, or painfully slow. Think about how many people experience seasons where nothing seems to move forward. You try to build something meaningful, but progress stalls. You pray for direction, but clarity does not come immediately. You hope for change, but the same struggles seem to remain. It can feel like walking through thick fog. You can still move forward, but you cannot see very far ahead. Each step requires patience. Each step requires trust. And in those moments, it is easy to become discouraged. The human heart naturally longs for answers. We want to understand why something is happening and when it will end. But difficult seasons rarely provide those answers right away. Instead, they often ask us to walk forward without knowing the full story. This is where faith becomes more than a comforting idea. It becomes a daily decision. A decision to trust even when life feels uncertain. A decision to keep moving forward even when the road feels long. Many people assume that faith means never struggling with doubt or fear. But the truth is that faith often grows strongest during the very seasons when life feels most difficult. Because when everything is easy, trust is simple. But when life becomes complicated, faith becomes a choice. And difficult seasons often reveal things about our hearts that we never would have noticed during easier times. For example, hardship can reveal where we have placed our security. Sometimes we place our hope in things that seem stable, our plans, our careers, our relationships, or our expectations about how life should unfold. But when those things shift or disappear, we suddenly realize how fragile they can be. And while that realization can be painful, it can also become the beginning of something deeper. Because when temporary things fail to hold us up, we are reminded to anchor our lives in something stronger. In someone stronger. Difficult seasons also slow us down. In modern life, people are constantly moving. There are always goals to chase, responsibilities to manage, and expectations to meet. The pace rarely slows. But hardship has a way of interrupting that rhythm. It forces us to pause. It forces us to reflect. It forces us to confront questions we may have avoided while everything seemed comfortable. Questions like, what truly matters in my life? What kind of person am I becoming? Where am I placing my trust? These questions are not always easy to answer. Yet they are often the questions that lead to the most meaningful growth. It is also important to understand that difficult seasons do not mean God has stepped away from your life. In fact, many times the opposite is true. Just because God feels silent does not mean He is absent. Just because the path is difficult does not mean it is the wrong path. Sometimes the road that feels the hardest is the one that leads us exactly where we are meant to go. Imagine a traveler walking through a mountain path. The road may be steep. The climb may be exhausting. At times the traveler may wonder if the effort is worth it. But when they finally reach the top, the view reveals something beautiful that could never have been seen from the valley below. In a similar way, difficult seasons often lift us to places of wisdom and strength that we could not have reached otherwise. They shape our character. They deepen our compassion. They refine our priorities. And perhaps most importantly, they teach us to depend on God in ways we never did before. Many people who later look back on their hardest seasons eventually realize something surprising. Those seasons, painful as they were, became turning points in their lives. Moments where their perspective changed. Moments where their faith deepened. Moments where they discovered strength they never knew they had. This does not mean the pain was easy. It does not mean the struggle was enjoyable. But it does mean that those seasons were not meaningless. Because sometimes the seasons that feel like they are breaking us are actually the seasons that are shaping us. And while it may not always be clear in the moment, difficult seasons often become the foundation for something greater that God is building in our lives. So if life feels heavy right now, if the road ahead seems uncertain, remember this. A difficult season is not necessarily the end of your story. It may simply be the chapter where something important is being prepared. And sometimes the chapters that feel the hardest to read are the ones that lead to the most powerful endings. When we walk through difficult seasons, it can sometimes feel as though our struggles are unique, as though no one else has experienced the same kind of confusion or waiting. But if we look closely at the stories throughout the Bible, we begin to see something powerful and reassuring. Many of the people God used the most walked through long, painful seasons before they ever saw the purpose behind them. Their lives were not simple stories of immediate blessings and easy victories. Instead, their journeys were filled with uncertainty, setbacks, and moments that must have felt incredibly unfair. And yet, those very seasons became the places where God was preparing them for something far greater. One of the most powerful examples of this is the story of Joseph. Joseph began his life with a dream. As a young man, he believed that God had a special purpose for him. But instead of that dream unfolding quickly, Joseph's life took a shocking and painful turn. His own brothers betrayed him. They sold him into slavery and allowed their father to believe he had died. In a single moment, Joseph lost his family, his freedom, and the future he once imagined. Imagine the confusion he must have felt. He had done nothing to deserve this suffering. He had simply trusted the dream that God had placed in his heart. Yet suddenly he found himself alone in a foreign land, forced to serve as a slave in a stranger's house. For many people, this would have been the moment when faith began to fade. But Joseph's difficult season was far from over. After years of faithful service, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Once again, life seemed to move further away from the future he once believed in. He remained in prison for years. Years of waiting. Years of uncertainty. Years where it must have felt as though God had forgotten him. But what Joseph could not see in those moments was that God was quietly arranging events beyond his understanding. Eventually, the day came when Joseph was called out of prison to interpret a dream for Pharaoh. In a moment that no one could have predicted, Joseph's wisdom led him to become one of the most powerful leaders in Egypt. The man who had once been a slave and a prisoner was now placed in a position to save entire nations from famine. And years later, when Joseph was finally reunited with the brothers who had betrayed him, he spoke words that reveal the hidden purpose behind his suffering. He said, "What you meant for evil against me, God meant for good." Joseph's difficult season had never been meaningless. Even when it seemed like everything was falling apart, God was guiding his life toward a greater purpose. Another powerful example can be seen in the life of David. David was chosen by God and anointed as the future king of Israel when he was still a young shepherd. It might seem logical to assume that his life would quickly move toward the throne, but that is not what happened. Instead, David entered one of the longest and most difficult seasons of waiting imaginable. King Saul, the very man David served faithfully, became jealous and threatened by him. What followed was years of danger and uncertainty. David was forced to run for his life. He lived in caves. He wandered through wilderness places. He faced betrayal and loneliness. Imagine how confusing this must have been for him. He knew that God had promised him a future as king. Yet instead of moving toward that promise, his life seemed to move further away from it. Still, during those long years of difficulty, something important was happening. David was being shaped. His character was growing stronger. His faith was deepening. He was learning humility, patience, and dependence on God in ways that could never have happened if he had immediately received power and authority. And when the time finally came for David to become king, he was no longer just a young shepherd with a promise. He was a man whose heart had been refined through years of struggle. Then there is the story of Job. Job's life represents one of the most extreme examples of a difficult season. In a very short period of time, Job lost nearly everything he had. His wealth disappeared. His children died. His health was taken from him. The pain he experienced was overwhelming. And throughout much of the story, Job struggled to understand why such suffering had entered his life. He asked questions that many people still ask today. Why would God allow this? What did I do to deserve it? Where is God in the middle of my suffering? Job never received a simple explanation for everything that happened to him. But what he did discover was something even deeper. Through his suffering, Job encountered God in a way that changed his understanding forever. Near the end of the story, Job says something remarkable. He says that before his suffering, he had only heard about God. But now, after everything he had experienced, he truly knew him. His difficult season had led him to a deeper relationship with God than he had ever known before. And eventually, his life was restored in ways he could never have imagined during his darkest days. When we step back and look at these stories together, a powerful pattern begins to appear. Joseph endured betrayal and imprisonment before stepping into leadership. David endured years of danger and waiting before becoming king. Job endured unimaginable loss before discovering a deeper understanding of God. In every case, the difficult season came before the fulfillment of the promise. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. While they were living through those seasons, they could not see the full picture. Joseph did not know prison would lead him to the palace. David did not know the wilderness was preparing him for the throne. Job did not know his suffering would lead him to a deeper encounter with God. They simply continued walking forward with faith, even when life did not make sense. And that same truth still applies today. When we walk through difficult seasons, we often assume that the struggle itself must be the end of the story. But many times, it is only the middle of the story. A chapter where things feel uncertain. A chapter where the purpose is not yet clear. A chapter where faith is quietly being strengthened. If these stories teach us anything, it is that God often does some of his greatest work in the parts of life that feel the most confusing. The waiting seasons. The wilderness seasons. The seasons where we feel overlooked or forgotten. Those seasons may not look impressive on the surface, but beneath them, God is often building something stronger than we realize. And just like the people who came before us, we may one day look back and understand that the season we thought was breaking us was actually preparing us for something far greater than we ever imagined. One of the hardest parts of walking through a difficult season is not always the struggle itself. Often, the hardest part is not knowing why it is happening. When life becomes heavy, the human heart naturally searches for explanations. We want clarity. We want a timeline. We want reassurance that the pain we are experiencing has meaning. But many of the seasons God allows in our lives come without immediate answers. We pray and ask God to show us what he is doing, yet the response we receive is often silence. Days turn into weeks. Weeks become months, sometimes even longer. And during that waiting, it is easy to believe that nothing is happening. But one of the deepest spiritual truths is this. Just because we cannot see what God is doing does not mean he is not working. Much of God's work happens quietly, beneath the surface of our circumstances. Think about how construction happens when a large building is being created. Before the walls rise and before the structure becomes visible, the builders spend a long time working on the foundation. Heavy machines dig deep into the ground. Concrete is poured. Steel structures are placed underground. From the outside, it might look like very little progress is happening. For weeks, sometimes months, all people see is dirt, noise, and disruption. But those early stages are the most important part of the entire project. Because if the foundation is weak, the building will eventually collapse. In many ways, difficult seasons in life function like spiritual foundations. God often uses these seasons to build strength inside us that cannot be developed during comfortable times. One of the first things he begins shaping is our character. Character does not grow easily when life is always smooth. When everything goes according to plan, it is easy to feel confident and in control. But when things become difficult, something deeper is tested. Patience is tested. Humility is tested. Trust is tested. And through that process, character slowly becomes stronger. Another thing God often develops during difficult seasons is dependence on him. When life is comfortable, people naturally rely on their own plans and abilities. It is easy to believe that success comes mainly from personal effort and control. But when circumstances fall apart, we quickly discover how limited our control really is. Doors close that we cannot reopen. Situations appear that we cannot fix. Paths we expected to walk suddenly disappear. In those moments, something shifts in the human heart. We begin to pray differently. Not just quick prayers for blessings or success, but deeper prayers that come from a place of surrender. Prayers that say, God, I don't understand what is happening, but I need your guidance. God, I cannot solve this on my own. God, please lead me. Those moments of honest dependence often become the moments where faith begins to grow the most. Another hidden purpose of difficult seasons is realignment. Sometimes God allows challenges because He is gently redirecting the course of our lives. Human beings naturally create plans for their future. We imagine where we will live. We imagine the work we will do. We imagine the relationships we will build. But sometimes those plans are not the path that will lead us to the purpose God has prepared for us. And because of that, God may allow circumstances that interrupt our direction. A door closes. A job opportunity disappears. A relationship changes. A plan falls apart. At first, these moments can feel like failure or loss. But sometimes those very disruptions are actually divine redirection. A roadblock that prevents us from traveling down a path that would have led us away from something better. Think about how a shepherd guides sheep. Sheep do not always understand where they should go. Sometimes they wander toward dangerous places without realizing it. The shepherd's role is to guide them back to safety, even if that means blocking certain directions or leading them through unfamiliar terrain. In a similar way, God often guides our lives through closed doors and unexpected turns, not to punish us, but to lead us toward places we could not reach on our own. Difficult seasons also have a way of revealing what truly matters. During comfortable times, it is easy to fill life with distractions, endless goals, endless activities, endless concerns about things that may not actually matter in the long run. But hardship has a way of clearing away those distractions. It forces us to focus on the deeper parts of life: love, faith, purpose, connection with God. Many people who walk through difficult seasons eventually discover that their priorities begin to shift. Things that once felt incredibly important suddenly lose their power. And things that once seemed small, like quiet moments with God, meaningful conversations, or simple gratitude, begin to feel far more valuable. Perhaps one of the most beautiful things God does during difficult seasons is that He draws closer to us. The Bible often describes God as being especially near to those who are hurting. Not distant, not uninterested, but close, closer than we often realize. In moments when life feels overwhelming, many people discover a deeper sense of God's presence than they ever felt during easier times. They discover that God is not only present in moments of celebration, He is also present in moments of pain. He walks with us through the valley just as surely as He stands with us on the mountain. And sometimes the quiet moments in the valley become the places where our relationship with God grows stronger than it ever has before. Of course, none of this removes the reality that difficult seasons are still painful. Waiting is still hard. Uncertainty is still uncomfortable. Loneliness still hurts. But when we begin to understand that God may be working behind the scenes, our perspective slowly begins to change. Instead of asking only, "Why is this happening to me?" we begin asking a different question. What might God be preparing in my life through this season? That question opens the door to hope, because it reminds us that the current moment is not the entire story. Just like a book has many chapters, life often moves through seasons that only make sense when we look back later. And sometimes the chapters that feel the most confusing in the moment become the chapters that lead to the most meaningful transformation. God's work in our lives is often patient and intentional. He is not rushing. He is not reacting to events randomly. He is guiding a story that stretches far beyond the present moment. And while we may not always understand what He is doing behind the scenes, we can trust that the author of the story knows exactly how each chapter fits into the greater purpose of our lives. So if you are walking through a season that feels uncertain right now, remember this. There may be far more happening beneath the surface than you can see. Foundations may be forming. Character may be growing. Direction may be shifting. Faith may be deepening. And one day, when you look back, you may realize that the season you thought was holding you back was actually the season that quietly moved you forward. There are certain kinds of growth in life that simply cannot happen during easy seasons. Comfort can teach us gratitude. Peaceful times can teach us joy. But difficult seasons teach us depth. And depth is something that cannot be rushed. When life becomes challenging, something begins to change inside us. The version of ourselves that existed before the struggle slowly begins to transform. At first, that transformation may not feel positive. It may feel exhausting. It may feel like everything inside us is being stretched beyond what we thought we could handle. But stretching is often how strength begins. Imagine a tree growing in a perfectly controlled environment. No wind, no storms, no pressure. That tree may grow quickly, but its roots remain shallow. Because it never had to fight for stability, it never learned to grow deeper into the soil. Now imagine a tree growing in a place where storms pass through regularly. Wind bends its branches. Rain pounds against its trunk. Seasons change harshly. That tree does not grow the same way. Its roots push deeper into the ground. Its trunk becomes stronger. Over time, it becomes capable of surviving storms that would easily destroy a weaker tree. Human lives often grow in a similar way. Storms develop strength, and spiritual storms often develop spiritual depth. One of the most important things difficult seasons grow inside us is patience. Patience is not something people naturally enjoy learning. Most of us prefer quick answers and immediate solutions. We want clarity now. We want doors to open now. We want the pain to end now. But life rarely moves according to our personal timelines. Some answers take time. Some healing takes time. Some transformations take time. And during that waiting, patience slowly begins to grow. Patience teaches us to trust that God's timing may be different from our own. It teaches us to continue moving forward even when progress feels slow. Over time, patience becomes one of the most powerful strengths a person can develop. Another quality that grows during difficult seasons is humility. Humility is not about thinking less of ourselves. It is about recognizing that we are not meant to control everything. In comfortable seasons, it is easy to feel self-sufficient. We believe that our intelligence, planning, and effort are enough to handle whatever comes our way. But hardship reminds us that life is far more complex than we imagined. Unexpected situations appear. Challenges arise that we cannot solve alone. And in those moments, humility opens the door for something beautiful. Dependence on God. Instead of trying to carry everything on our own, we begin to recognize our need for divine guidance and strength. This humility softens the heart. It allows us to listen more carefully. It allows us to pray more honestly. It allows us to trust more deeply. Another transformation that often happens during difficult seasons is compassion. People who have never experienced hardship sometimes struggle to understand the pain of others. But when someone has walked through deep valleys themselves, something inside them changes. They begin to recognize pain in others more quickly. They listen more carefully. They respond with greater kindness and understanding. Hardship often creates people who are capable of lifting others up because they understand what it feels like to struggle. In this way, our most difficult seasons can eventually become the very experiences that allow us to help someone else survive theirs. And perhaps one of the most powerful things that grows during hard seasons is faith that is no longer shallow. It is easy to believe in God when life is comfortable, when prayers are quickly answered, when blessings are obvious, when everything feels stable. But faith that has never been tested is often fragile. When difficulties arrive, that kind of faith can easily begin to crack. But when someone continues to trust God through the storm, something remarkable happens. Their faith becomes rooted much deeper. They learn to trust God even when they cannot see the outcome. They learn to believe that God is good even when life feels painful. They learn that faith is not simply about receiving blessings, but about trusting the one who leads them through every season. Over time, this kind of faith becomes incredibly strong. It is no longer built on circumstances. It is built on relationship, on trust, on experience, on the quiet moments when God carried them through situations they once believed they could not survive. Many people later look back at their hardest seasons and realize something surprising. Those were the seasons where their spiritual life grew the most, where their prayers became more real, where their understanding of God deepened, where their hearts changed. Of course, no one wishes for suffering. No one hopes for difficult seasons. But when those seasons arrive, they carry the potential to transform us in ways comfort never could. Just like fire refines precious metals, hardship often removes the superficial parts of our lives and reveals something stronger underneath. It reveals courage we did not know we had. It reveals resilience that surprises us. It reveals a faith that continues standing even when the winds of life blow strongly against it. And the beautiful thing about spiritual growth is that it rarely stays hidden. The strength built during one difficult season often becomes the strength that carries us through future challenges. It becomes the wisdom we share with others. It becomes the calm presence we offer to someone else who is struggling. So if you find yourself in a season that feels difficult right now, it may help to remember this truth. Growth is often quiet. Transformation is often slow. And some of the strongest people in the world are the ones who were shaped during seasons that once felt unbearably hard. You may not see all the changes happening inside you right now, but just like roots growing beneath the soil, something meaningful may be forming beneath the surface. And one day, that hidden growth may become the very strength that allows you to stand firm, no matter what storms life may bring. One of the greatest challenges during difficult seasons is learning how to trust God while the storm is still happening. Trusting God after everything works out is much easier. When the situation finally improves, when the answers finally come, when the pain fades, and we can see the purpose clearly, faith often feels natural. But real trust is formed in the middle of uncertainty. It is formed during the moments when the future is unclear, when prayers feel unanswered, and when the path forward seems hidden. This kind of trust does not come instantly. It develops slowly, step by step, as we continue walking with God, even when we cannot see where the road leads. Think about a child walking with a parent through a dark forest at night. The child cannot see the path clearly. The shadows look unfamiliar. Every sound feels larger than it actually is. But as long as the child holds the parent's hand, there is a quiet sense of security. Not because the child understands the path, but because the child trusts the one who does. In many ways, faith during difficult seasons looks like that. We may not understand where life is going. We may not know why certain doors have closed. We may not know how long the struggle will last. But we continue holding on to God's guidance, believing that He sees what we cannot. One of the first steps toward this kind of trust is letting go of the need to control everything. Human beings naturally want control. We want to know what will happen next. We want plans that unfold exactly the way we imagined. But life rarely follows perfect plans. And sometimes the hardest part of faith is accepting that we do not have full control over every outcome. Letting go of control does not mean giving up effort or responsibility. It simply means recognizing that there are parts of life that only God can guide. It means doing our best with the opportunities we have, while trusting that God is leading the bigger story. Another important part of trusting God during difficult seasons is remembering what He has already done. When storms arrive, fear often tries to convince us that we are alone. It whispers that nothing will improve. It suggests that God has forgotten us. But when we look back over our lives, we often discover something different. We remember moments when God provided unexpected help. Moments when doors opened at exactly the right time. Moments when strength appeared just when we thought we had none left. Those memories become anchors during new storms. They remind us that the same God who carried us before is still present now. Sometimes trust grows not through new answers, but through remembering past faithfulness. Another way trust grows during difficult seasons is through daily faithfulness. It is easy to think of faith as a single dramatic moment of courage. But in reality, faith is usually built through small, consistent decisions. Choosing to pray even when we feel discouraged. Choosing to hope even when circumstances feel heavy. Choosing to keep moving forward one step at a time. These small decisions may not seem impressive at the moment, but over time, they shape a powerful pattern of trust. Just like muscles grow through repeated effort, faith grows through repeated trust. Day after day, step after step, prayer after prayer. Over time, something begins to change inside us. Instead of panicking during uncertainty, we become calmer. Instead of fearing every unexpected challenge, we begin to trust that God is capable of guiding us through it. Instead of feeling completely lost during difficult seasons, we begin to recognize that storms are often temporary chapters, not permanent endings. Trust also grows when we learn to focus on God's character rather than our circumstances. Circumstances change constantly. Some days are peaceful. Some days are stressful. Some seasons feel joyful. Others feel confusing. If our faith is built only on circumstances, it will rise and fall with every situation we face. But God's character does not change. His wisdom remains steady. His love remains constant. His guidance remains trustworthy even when we cannot immediately see where it is leading. When we shift our focus from temporary circumstances to the steady character of God, trust begins to grow stronger. We begin to understand that even when life feels uncertain, the one guiding our lives is not uncertain at all. And perhaps one of the most beautiful discoveries people make during difficult seasons is this: God often reveals his presence most clearly in the middle of the storm. Many people later say that the moments when they felt closest to God were not during the easiest seasons of life. They were during the moments when they had nowhere else to turn. Moments when prayer became deeply personal. Moments when quiet faith replaced noisy confidence. Moments when God's peace appeared in the middle of chaos. These experiences leave lasting impressions on the soul. They remind us that faith is not just about believing certain ideas. It is about walking in relationship with a God who stays present through every chapter of life, even the difficult ones. So if you are currently walking through a storm, remember this: trust does not require having all the answers. It simply requires continuing to walk with God while the answers are still unfolding. Like a traveler moving through fog, you may not be able to see the entire road ahead, but you can still take the next step, and the next, and the next, because faith reminds us that the one guiding our path can see far beyond what we can imagine. And sometimes the road that feels uncertain today becomes the very path that leads us into a future we never could have planned on our own. One of the greatest challenges during difficult seasons is learning how to trust God while the storm is still happening. Trusting God after everything works out is much easier. When the situation finally improves, when the answers finally come, when the pain fades, and we can see the purpose clearly, faith often feels natural. But real trust is formed in the middle of uncertainty. It is formed during the moments when the future is unclear, when prayers feel unanswered, and when the path forward seems hidden. This kind of trust does not come instantly. It develops slowly, step by step, as we continue walking with God, even when we cannot see where the road leads. Think about a child walking with a parent through a dark forest at night. The child cannot see the path clearly. The shadows look unfamiliar. Every sound feels larger than it actually is. But as long as the child holds the parent's hand, there is a quiet sense of security. Not because the child understands the path, but because the child trusts the one who does. In many ways, faith during difficult seasons looks like that. We may not understand where life is going. We may not know why certain doors have closed. We may not know how long the struggle will last, but we continue holding on to God's guidance, believing that He sees what we cannot. One of the first steps toward this kind of trust is letting go of the need to control everything. Human beings naturally want control. We want to know what will happen next. We want plans that unfold exactly the way we imagined. But life rarely follows perfect plans. And sometimes the hardest part of faith is accepting that we do not have full control over every outcome. Letting go of control does not mean giving up effort or responsibility. It simply means recognizing that there are parts of life that only God can guide. It means doing our best with the opportunities we have, while trusting that God is leading the bigger story. Another important part of trusting God during difficult seasons is remembering what He has already done. When storms arrive, fear often tries to convince us that we are alone. It whispers that nothing will improve. It suggests that God has forgotten us. But when we look back over our lives, we often discover something different. We remember moments when God provided unexpected help. Moments when doors opened at exactly the right time. Moments when strength appeared just when we thought we had none left. Those memories become anchors during new storms. They remind us that the same God who carried us before is still present now. Sometimes trust grows not through new answers, but through remembering past faithfulness. Another way trust grows during difficult seasons is through daily faithfulness. It is easy to think of faith as a single dramatic moment of courage. But in reality, faith is usually built through small, consistent decisions. Choosing to pray even when we feel discouraged. Choosing to hope even when circumstances feel heavy. Choosing to keep moving forward one step at a time. These small decisions may not seem impressive at the moment, but over time, they shape a powerful pattern of trust. Just like muscles grow through repeated effort, faith grows through repeated trust. Day after day, step after step, prayer after prayer. Over time, something begins to change inside us. Instead of panicking during uncertainty, we become calmer. Instead of fearing every unexpected challenge, we begin to trust that God is capable of guiding us through it. Instead of feeling completely lost during difficult seasons, we begin to recognize that storms are often temporary chapters, not permanent endings. Trust also grows when we learn to focus on God's character rather than our circumstances. Circumstances change constantly. Some days are peaceful. Some days are stressful. Some seasons feel joyful. Others feel confusing. If our faith is built only on circumstances, it will rise and fall with every situation we face. But God's character does not change. His wisdom remains steady. His love remains constant. His guidance remains trustworthy even when we cannot immediately see where it is leading. When we shift our focus from temporary circumstances to the steady character of God, trust begins to grow stronger. We begin to understand that even when life feels uncertain, the one guiding our lives is not uncertain at all. And perhaps one of the most beautiful discoveries people make during difficult seasons is this: God often reveals His presence most clearly in the middle of the storm. Many people later say that the moments when they felt closest to God were not during the easiest seasons of life. They were during the moments when they had nowhere else to turn. Moments when prayer became deeply personal. Moments when quiet faith replaced noisy confidence. Moments when God's peace appeared in the middle of chaos. These experiences leave lasting impressions on the soul. They remind us that faith is not just about believing certain ideas. It is about walking in relationship with a God who stays present through every chapter of life, even the difficult ones. So if you are currently walking through a storm, remember this: trust does not require having all the answers. It simply requires continuing to walk with God while the answers are still unfolding. Like a traveler moving through fog, you may not be able to see the entire road ahead, but you can still take the next step, and the next, and the next, because faith reminds us that the one guiding our path can see far beyond what we can imagine. And sometimes the road that feels uncertain today becomes the very path that leads us into a future we never could have planned on our own. There is something powerful that happens inside a person who has walked through difficult seasons with God. It is not always loud. It is not always dramatic. Often, it is quiet strength. A kind of strength that cannot be seen immediately from the outside, but becomes deeply rooted inside the heart. Before hardship, many people move through life with a certain level of confidence that comes from comfort. Plans feel predictable. The future feels controllable. But after someone walks through storms, real storms that test their faith, their patience, and their endurance, something inside them changes. They begin to see life differently. They understand that strength is not the absence of struggle. Strength is the ability to keep walking even when the road becomes difficult. And when a person walks through that kind of journey with God, the strength that develops is not just emotional strength. It becomes spiritual strength. This kind of strength carries a deep sense of calm. People who have been shaped by difficult seasons often stop panicking over things that once terrified them. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to look different. Not because life stopped being challenging, but because they now know something they did not know before. They have survived storms already. And if God carried them through those storms, He can carry them through the next ones as well. There is also a kind of wisdom that begins to grow. Hard seasons teach lessons that comfortable seasons cannot. They teach us that not every delay is a failure. They teach us that not every closed door is rejection. They teach us that sometimes the things we desperately wanted were not the things that were best for us. Over time, this wisdom changes how we approach life. Instead of rushing ahead anxiously, we learn to pause and trust. Instead of trying to control every detail, we begin to listen more carefully for God's direction. Instead of fearing uncertainty, we begin to recognize that some of life's greatest blessings arrive through unexpected paths. Another beautiful thing that happens after difficult seasons is that people often become sources of strength for others. Someone who has never experienced hardship may offer sympathy, but someone who has truly walked through deep valleys can offer something even more powerful: understanding. They know what it feels like to sit in silence when life feels overwhelming. They know what it feels like to pray when answers seem distant. They know what it feels like to keep believing even when the outcome is unclear. And because of that, their words carry weight. Their presence brings comfort. Their story becomes a light for someone else who is walking through darkness. In this way, God often turns our hardest seasons into tools that help others survive theirs. The pain we once thought was meaningless becomes part of a story that encourages someone else not to give up. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation that happens through difficult seasons is this. Our relationship with God becomes deeper and more personal. Before hardship, faith can sometimes remain theoretical. We believe in God, we pray occasionally, and we hope things go well. But when life becomes difficult, faith often becomes far more real. Prayer becomes more honest. Dependence becomes more genuine. Trust becomes more intentional. We begin to experience God not just as an idea, but as a presence that walks with us through real situations. And those experiences stay with us. Years later, when we look back at the seasons that once felt unbearable, we often realize something surprising. Those were the seasons when we grew closest to God. Those were the moments when faith stopped being shallow and started becoming strong. Those were the days when God quietly shaped our hearts in ways that would guide the rest of our lives. Of course, when we are inside the storm, we rarely see these things happening. When the wind is loud and the rain is heavy, it is hard to recognize growth. It is hard to notice transformation. It is hard to imagine that something meaningful is being built inside us. But time reveals what the moment hides. Just like roots growing deep beneath the soil, strength can be forming even when nothing appears to be changing on the surface. And one day, when the storm quiets, we often look back and realize something remarkable. The season we thought would break us actually built us. It built resilience. It built patience. It built wisdom. It built faith. And most importantly, it built a deeper trust in the God who walked beside us the entire time. So if you are currently walking through a difficult season, remember this. What feels like weakness right now may actually be the beginning of a strength you have never known before. What feels like delay may actually be preparation. What feels like silence may actually be God working quietly behind the scenes. Your story is still unfolding, and the strength being built inside you today may become the very foundation that carries you into a future greater than you can currently imagine. As we come to the end of this reflection, there is one simple truth that quietly stands above everything else. Every season of life has a purpose. Some seasons feel bright and joyful. Some seasons feel calm and steady. And some seasons feel heavy, confusing, and difficult to understand. But none of them are meaningless. Even the seasons that test us the most are often the seasons that shape us the deepest. When we are living inside a difficult chapter, it is easy to believe that something has gone wrong. We may feel like we took the wrong path, made the wrong decision, or somehow missed the life we were supposed to have. But life rarely unfolds in perfectly predictable ways. Sometimes the very road we are walking, the one filled with obstacles, delays, and uncertainty, is actually the road that leads us toward growth, wisdom, and a stronger relationship with God. It is natural to want quick answers. We want to know why things are happening. We want to know when the struggle will end. We want to see the full picture. But faith often asks us to live with something uncomfortable, trusting God even when the full picture is not visible yet. Imagine reading a novel and stopping in the middle of a difficult chapter. At that moment, the story may look chaotic. Characters may be struggling. Conflicts may feel overwhelming. But the author knows something the reader cannot yet see. The story is still unfolding. And sometimes the most powerful moments in a story come after the hardest chapters. Our lives can work in a similar way. The chapter you are living right now may not be the final chapter. It may not even be the chapter that defines your story. It may simply be the part where the character grows stronger, where patience is learned, where faith becomes real, where preparation quietly happens before something meaningful appears. Many people later realize that the seasons they once feared were actually the seasons that prepared them for the life they were meant to live. The delay that once frustrated them protected them from the wrong opportunity. The struggle that once exhausted them built the resilience they needed for future responsibilities. The quiet waiting that once felt empty turned out to be a time when God was shaping their character behind the scenes. What once looked like obstacles eventually revealed themselves as guidance. But while we are still in the middle of the process, that perspective can be difficult to see. And that is where trust becomes essential. Trust does not mean pretending that life is always easy. It does not mean ignoring pain or denying confusion. Trust simply means believing that God is still working even when we cannot immediately see how. It means continuing to walk forward, step by step, with the confidence that our lives are not unfolding randomly. There is wisdom guiding the journey. There is purpose behind the timing. There is a larger story being written. Sometimes that story moves slowly. Sometimes it takes unexpected turns. Sometimes it brings us through valleys before leading us toward higher ground. But throughout the entire journey, one truth remains steady. God never wastes a season. The lessons learned during difficult moments often become the foundation for future strength. The patience built during waiting often prepares us for responsibilities we could not have handled earlier. The faith developed during uncertainty often becomes the anchor that steadies us during future storms. So if you are currently walking through a season that feels confusing or heavy, remember this. You are not alone in the journey. Many people who now live with deep peace and strong faith once stood exactly where you are standing. They once wondered when the storm would end. They once questioned the purpose behind the struggle. But with time, they discovered something important. The season they feared the most had quietly been preparing them for something greater. And the same may be true for you. Your story is still unfolding. Your path is still being guided. Your growth is still happening, even in moments when it feels invisible. So take a deep breath. Release the pressure to understand everything right now, and allow yourself to trust the season you are in. Because sometimes the chapters that feel the most uncertain are the very chapters where God is doing his most important work.